Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sania Farooqui show. Today, we have with us Yasmin Ullah. She is a Rohingya social justice activist. Born in the northern Rakhine state of Myanmar, she fled to Thailand in 1995 along with her parents and remained a refugee in Thailand until 2011. She formerly served as the president of the Rohingya Human Rights Network, a nonprofit group led by activists across Canada in advocacy and raising public awareness about the Rohingya genocide. Yasmin has continued to engage with the Rohingya issues through an intersectional lens, locally in Canada and internationally as well. She has worked on various projects such as the Time to Act, Rohingya Voices exhibition with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the Genocide Learning Tool with the Montreal Holocaust Museum, and the anthology I'm a Rohingya, where she published her poetry along with other Rohingya poets from all around the world. She's currently completing her undergraduate degree in political science. Thank you so much, Yasmin. Wonderful to have you on the Sania Farooqui show. And I'm really glad that we have finally managed to connect and speak to each other today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yasmin, I'm going to start with what's happening in Myanmar at the moment. You know, the military is back in charge. You know, they've overthrown the democratic government and have declared a year-long state of emergency in the country. It seized control on 1st February. Can you talk a little about, what exactly happened in Myanmar and how this entire coup took place?
So on February 1st, where, very close to the date of the resuming of the parliament in session in Myanmar, since the last election took place in 2020, the NLD, led by Daw San Suu Kyi, the de facto leader of the previous administration, won a landslide election countrywide. And the military happened to basically pause that process and institute this state of emergency, and basically placed charges against the previous president, as well as the de facto leader, the leader of the NLD party. And most of those charges are something to do with the violation of COVID-19. It's still a very, very vague and very convoluted type of criminal charges. They're actually currently on trial right now. Today, they were basically brought to trial in the court in Myanmar without their representation, without their lawyers, which is, very much illegal, but the military found a way to justify that somehow. And basically what brought the coup to the attention of the international community was that the coup took place soon after the election result, and the new cabinet members are coming together, and the memory of the coup d'etat from 60 years ago and onwards, we've had 3 coups so far since 1962. That memory still live very deeply within a lot of Myanmar citizens, and the pain and the hurt that comes with it still reminds them of, the glory that the country could never actually achieve. So the protest began in Naypyidaw and in Yangon, and slowly it spread throughout the country, where people actually started to protest against the military overthrowing the democratic transition process, as well as overthrowing the elected officials, elected members of parliament. And they're also, united on various different platforms in different campaigns, but they're united in one campaign called Civil Disobedience Movement, which is a way to basically relay the message and convey it to the military that they reject the Myanmar coup, the military coup, and that is not part of the democratic process, and they want their democracy back. They do not want this rejection of elected government being overthrown. They want their election results of 2020 to be respected. And also, with part of all of those, there comes the issues of the ethnic minorities and various different, human rights and crimes against humanity issues that arises, not just among, not just about the Rohingya issues that happened and caught the international attention, but it encompasses the entire country, and it actually emphasized the systemic problems that exist within our country that is created by the military, because that was, the distraction that they wanted to have, so that we divert attention away from actually caring about the systemic nature of all of these problems, and instead fight against each other. It's, a simple rule of divide and conquer. Currently, the civil disobedience movement have been threatened really, really terribly. There have been a lot of psychological warfare that the military have launched. First, it was the, usual dissolving of protest by shooting water cannons, which is very, very much not something that the international human rights standard would call for, and it's really, really illegal. But at the same time, they're also shooting rubber bullets, and they escalated to nightly raids where they go into different houses around the areas that are known to have, protests, and go and arrest people. And there have been a lot of cases of arson. On top of that, various different ethnic areas, specifically today, railways workers have actually went on strike, and they put themselves on the railways to showcase that they actually disapprove of this. And it's been really, really, really unifying in terms of, how many people have joined, and various different ethnic communities coming to actually show the support of, people voicing their own dissenting views against the military coup.
So human rights groups have condemned the coup and have called the shutdown heinous and reckless, and have also warned it could put people of Myanmar at the risk of human rights violation. Could you talk a little about what's going on the ground, and what are the reports that you're hearing?
So there have been a lot of attempts to dissolve protests and demonstrations. On top of that, there have been use of force, water cannons, rubber bullets. Specifically today, though, there have been reports of railroad workers being physically assaulted by the security forces, and various different other scenario where nightly raids is becoming very, very common to weaken the protesters' ability to actually go out in the morning. And they would arbitrarily arrest a lot of rights defenders, human rights defender, and democratic movement leaders in order to basically ensure that they shut down the voices and basically silence the people. But more and more people have come out, and more workers in different industries have actually went on strike. And even this includes healthcare workers and frontline workers who were the very first people to come out. So the situation is worrisome, to say the least. And it's very, very heinous, but we know probably less than 10% of what's going on the ground, and the kind of fear that it instills in people. And this is a very, very common tactic by the military that is used in all of the conflict areas across the country.
Yeah, but the military has also shut down the country's internet. Police have blocked all the main roads where people are protesting. They're not allowing protesters to move. We are hearing reports of gunshots in neighborhoods where there are just citizens, sitting inside the house, but there are people who have been shot. Can you tell us how the citizen protests are defying the military coup? How are people dealing with this? Do you know what's happening on the ground? Because it is difficult to get all the information with the internet being shut down right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As far as following the Twitter threads and really following the news, people are quite shaken by the court, but they also know that without coming together, without unifying, without actually taking to the street and making it known to the world that they reject this sort of unconstitutional seizing of power, they will not have another chance at this. And we've lived under a military regime for decades, and that includes the decade that we had with the NLD in power, because that was a compromise with the military in power. And living under their control have not proven to anybody that anyone was going to succeed or have sort of any upward social mobility at all. Everybody is sort of pressed under this layers of oppression by the military, basically to go back and benefit them economically. There's a lot of social injustices that are, very rampant, and basically they go unaddressed because of the military's power in the veto in the parliament, because 25% of their votes have to, they have 25% seat in the parliament, and that's written into the 2008 rewriting of the Constitution, which is also not something that the public have endorsed. And so all of this layers of oppression and various different kind of changes that have happened in the past have really drove people to the street, and they're just done with the fact that they would have to live under a culture of impunity where the militaries are just untouched, and they gain more and more money from the suffering of the people everywhere in the country.
Yeah, but what does the military coup mean? Like, what does it say about Aung San Suu Kyi? There was a small window where Myanmar experienced democracy, and now it seems to be slipping back into the military control. What does this signify? What does it say about Aung San Suu Kyi as well?
The very idea of her taking the trip to The Hague in 2019, at the end of 2019, to defend the actions of the military, spoke volume about who she is, first of all, as a person, and where she stands in her understanding of how democratic transition in Myanmar should progress. Sorry, and it isn't a genuine process, unfortunately, from the get-go. The first thing that the US, the United States, did right after her release, and her being able to become the de facto leader, was to ease off all of the sanctions that were placed against Myanmar. And by the way, most of the national enterprise are controlled by the military and their cronies. So it is a lot of money that went into lining the pockets of the generals, and the easing off of the sanctions really helped them to be able to seek all the foreign investments, and thus further oppress their own people, further, widespread of the racial, social inequality.
What is the role of social media in the current state? Why is the military so keen to block and shut down the internet? And there have also been reports of how Facebook misused its platform to speak against the Rohingyas, or perhaps promote content that was against the Rohingyas. Can you talk a little about that as well?
Absolutely, yeah. The reason why the military has been so successful at in the past 60 years at keeping the citizens at bay, in fear, of course, and under their power, have not, after the 88 generation or the Saffron Revolution, when people rose up and try to take back the power, and really call for democracy. Even when that happened, they didn't really succeed. The reason was because there was a lot of campaigns of disinformation. This is the tactic that the military has used and have been really, really successful at. There's also a lot of state propaganda that actually seeps into various different functions of the society, educational institutions, TV programs, various other kind of medias. And with the internet, they have actually used the state-of-the-art type of technology to spread more misinformation and basically create this hate rhetoric against Rohingya, basically calling us Bengali, calling us, recent migrants, calling us not belonging to the country, or using various different rhetoric that is very insulting and offensive. They're finding this, exponentially harder to do in the era of internet, because anyone would be allowed to do anything on the internet. And unfortunately for them, it is very different from China in a way that Facebook and various other media platform has not been sort of controlled in the way that China has done. So there is still a little bit of space left for people to actually do a little bit more free thinking and critical thinking and analyzing what is right and what is wrong. And there's more and more dissenting voice that are actually accumulating on the internet. More and more that, more and more of the resistance are growing within these different spaces. And so, for example, painting the Rohingya as folk's devil in sociological term to basically create moral panic isn't as easy as it did years ago, when it was just TV programs and some newspaper or something like that. So although Facebook and various different tactics that they've been using have actually succeeded to a certain extent to actually cause 2017 to happen. But right now, because people across the country are actually quite angry, and they're channeling all of that into finding various different technological leeway to gather, to accumulate, to actually hatch out different ideas and thoughts on how they could creatively go about navigating the repressive regime. And they're successful at it. So the military is quite threatened and scared. And this is how they retaliate. They shut down the internet so that people can't really gather, but it's still failing.
Yeah, because information is being shared. You had to flee from Myanmar in 1995 with your family, and you were also born in the Rakhine state in Myanmar. Could you have ever anticipated what we saw in 2017? The mass genocidal attempt against the Rohingyas.
Um, I would be lying if I say that I didn't. I think that internally we all sort of knew as Rohingya, because we've been cut off from our roots. We've been forced to leave in so many different ways, economically or otherwise, or for safety reasons. During the 1990s, it was, there was a lot of scorched earth campaigns and violent campaigns that the military has launched against the Rohingya. That was the first few attempts of actually push the Rohingya out. And there are a lot of Rohingya that are now in Bangladesh refugee camps who've been there for 40 years. So this was something that they were already doing as a test run. So I knew that something terrible was going to, was sort of doomed to happen at one point in time, but I didn't know what it would be. And I probably didn't expect the magnitude of the kind of violations that we would have to suffer through. But it was already ingrained in us to be intimidated, to fear the military, to fear the authority, because that's always been what the tactic that they've used on us. The same kind of tactics that you see right now, the psychological warfare, the raids at night, the shooting of people, the arbitrary arrest, the restriction of movements, all of the things that the protesters are dealing with right now have been used on every single ethnic communities and the Rohingya prior to actual campaign of violence, rape, torture, and killings.
Yeah. So where does this leave the crackdown on the Rohingyas? There are 600,000 Rohingyas still inhabiting the country. What is the impact of the ongoing military coup on their livelihood? How much does it threaten them?
Interestingly enough, the military general and the military, the department that's there, they actually did some outreach to various different leaders in Rakhine State, not excluding Rohingya at all, including Rohingya, and try to appease them, try to persuade them to actually thinking and legitimizing the stance of the military to justify the coup. And various leaders have been, given monetary value of some kind, and they've been persuaded in various other different ways. We don't really have too much details on this, but there are reports on this, and there is a really, really big party in Rakhine State, a political party that have endorsed the coup. Unfortunately, this was a Rakhine political party. But there are also promises that are being made to Rohingya groups, and the promise was that people will be able to come back. And actually, the military general Min Aung Hlaing actually appeared in the state TV and basically mentioned that it is still welcoming, various different international investment, and that it is trying to just, abide by the rules of democracy, and it's going to return the power to the people, and it will have basically appeasing the public and trying to persuade them to understanding his point of view. But he also mentioned something very, very interesting, saying that there will be an implementation of repatriation bilaterally with Bangladesh. And that state appearance was to basically ease off some international pressure that it's been feeling, because as we saw, the US, the United States, the president actually came out to express his concerns over the coup, but also saying that the United States have actually placed targeted sanctions against the assets and freezing the assets of the military, $1 billion in the US, also a lot of targeted sanctions against the military-owned companies. And although this took place to try to ease off some international pressure, there are still no details on how it will happen, what will happen, or, an example like whether or not Rohingya will be able to return to their original villages, or they will, ever get their homes back. So there is a lot of question around reintegration process. And I know that the military has never been genuine in how, or in the concerns about Rohingya. They're still going to offer us to do to basically have to go through the national verification process, which is basically giving us a second-class citizenship, basically to single us out, keep us, at the lower strata of the social group, so that we can further be persecuted and never actually get to move up the social ladder and be able to represent ourselves and be truly reintegrated into the Myanmar society and accepted.
Yeah. What are your comments on what's happening in Bangladesh, where thousands of Rohingya refugees are being shifted to Bhasan Char Island? We're seeing reports of human rights violations, sexual abuse, and people being forced to move into the island. What do you have to say about that?
Well, as long as the perpetrators and the culture of impunity remains in Myanmar, there is not a lot of likelihood that we would ever be able to hold anyone accountable, at least within the judicial processes that exist inside Myanmar, because it's filled with people who have served in the military or the personnel that are handpicked by the military. And so the system is completely corrupt. Although there are, hopes of the newer generations and the people who understand a little bit better, in terms of human rights and the standards of the international human rights legal mechanisms. But at the same time, the issue of bus and char creates very, very peculiar parallel with how the culture of impunity in Myanmar play out, because the very idea of moving Rohingya into an isolated island deprived the public of transparency of what goes on inside the island, puts a lot of people at risk of further human rights violations, especially because they're so isolated and they do not have access to the public. And to this day, since the very first move, since the first 300 people who were rescued off of the Bangladeshi shore were put there, they were promised to be reintegrated back. They were promised to be sent back into the Cox's Bazar refugee camps, but that never happened. There has to be a serious independent investigation and an assessment on the conditions of living on the island, to ensure that the quality of life is actually on par with, with basically how, a quality of life that a human should be treated as, like something that is, whether or not they're able to access basic rights every single day. Are they able to eat? Are they able to, have access to various different kind of resources? This is very worrying for me and for many Rohingya activists, because there have been reports of sexual and gender-based violence by the Bangladeshi Navy. And because they're sort of locked away in a way, there is a lot of concerns around, the women and children who basically suffered at the hands of the military, the Myanmar military, and now are suffering the culture. There is some sort of culture of impunity that's going on with the concept of moving people into bus and char, and these same people have been, going through a lot of the genocidal effects, and it seems to prolong the one of the worst impacts of genocide. So this whole idea of removing people and constantly moving them really put a strain on the ability of the Rohingya to be able to reestablish themselves, at least, to be able to be rid of trauma. And they continuously have to put on a survival mode, and they would not be able to really envision the future that they want, because right now they're constantly just trying to live on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, Yasmin, my last question for you is, being a Rohingya yourself and being a Rohingya activist, how hopeful are you about the future of the Rohingya community?
It gets hard from day to day, depending on what comes up. And there have been a lot of things in the past few days, but from the tone changes, or from the kind of attitude changes, or the expression, the perception of that, at least, that I've seen from my, fellow Burmese, is quite heartwarming, because for the past few years, even during the time that I was at the ICJ, there were protest and counter protest, against the ICJ case, and then the people who supported the ICJ case, who are mostly ethnic communities, because they've suffered similar crimes. And seeing that people are coming together and basically expressed to me that they regretted not having stood with us, it is a really big step, because I think that all that Rohingya have ever wanted, the first thing that we have wanted, was an apology of some kind, or even if it's not an apology, an acknowledgement that we have gone through something terrible that no humans should go through, and really an acknowledgement and acceptance of who we are as humans, and that we have value, inherent value, that exists within us, that shouldn't be violated. And so it brings me a little bit of joy and a little bit of hope in the changes that may come out of this coup, which would not be possible if the NLD actually take reign for maybe another decade or more. I feel that compromise with the military will never get anywhere farther than, some tiny changes to appease the public here and there. But this actual protest and countrywide demonstrations really prove to the country, to the people themselves, that their willpower is stronger than the military might, and that might actually bring about changes in true democratic transition in the future. And the only way Rohingya would be able to survive this genocide and the impacts of it is being able to live inside a country that is led by a true democratic government. And with that, because I've worked a little bit for the past few months with an organization called ALTSIAN on a project called Bridges Myanmar, which is bringing people together, especially young leaders of various different ethnic communities, to convene every weekend online, and we talk about various different human rights issues that our communities suffer through, and we talk about various different human rights mechanism that is available in the ASEAN, in terms of the UN or the Declaration of Human Rights, various different angle of it, and we discuss those things, and we have guest speakers. And the first meeting was a little bit rough and it comes across as sort of hostile almost, because we as Rohingya, we were joining because we knew that we are part of the country, and we never claimed to be anything else. But because of the years of propaganda and the socialization that have brought them to this moment, they have carried a lot of hate rhetoric with them. But then the shift took place, and it takes only a few months for the same young leaders to change their mindset completely and to change their tone towards Rohingya. And there was a little bit more solidarity among us, because if nothing unites us at all, and if the differences are so large and so great for us to actually we can't really look away from it, at least we unite on the ground that we have the same perpetrators.
Thank you, Yasmin. On that note, I'm going to wrap up. Truly wonderful to have you on the Sania Farooqui show and this very important conversation with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who've been watching, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you will subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'll see you again next week.